Three, two, and one. We're live.
Hello, everyone. Matt Lessinger here for our first if I say our first intelligent conversation of 2021, that doesn't come across too well, but the first one in this forum. I feel like we've taken almost 2 months off from doing these, and good Lord, a lot has happened during that time. So it would be remiss of us to not have a discussion today with an excellent panel. I'm here as always with my co-host Nolan Dalla. And Nolan, if you would be so kind as to introduce our other two guests, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Matt Lessinger. And this is our 11th edition of An Intelligent Conversation. One of our guests has been on many, many times and always has something insightful to say. So we asked him to come back again, and that's Vin Narayanan. Vin's there below me, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. Vin is a former editor and writer for USA Today in Washington, has worked all over the world, including Hong Kong, has a great business background, as well as a political insider knowledge. And certainly he has some opinions about what's going on. Before I introduce our other guest, how you doing today, Vin?
I'm hanging in there as best as we can. Thanks for having me on, gentlemen. I appreciate it. I love coming on.
And you're very good. Thank you. Our other guest, the first time, is our debut guest here on An Intelligent Conversation. Mark Tenner, I've known more than 20 years. His background goes back all the way to the 1960s in the state of California. He was a speechwriter, a political speechwriter, very close to Tom Bradley, the former mayor of Los Angeles, worked in Democratic Party politics in California for many, many years, and now lives in Las Vegas as the head of Tenner and Associates, firm that does a lot of business work, very, very connected company, a lot of legal work as well. And Mark is here because he's also very opinionated. Mark Tenner, nice to have you with us.
It's my pleasure.
Mark, sorry, Matt and Mark, I'm going to mix those two up. Sorry about that. Vin, I can pronounce your name. So Matt Lessinger, take us away for our first part on the Intelligent Conversation, talking about the election and the aftermath and the events of the last week. Wow.
Sure, and it's great to have you back, Vin, and it's great to have you, Mark, for the first time. Originally Nolan had been like, we've taken 2 months off. Let's go recap everything that's happened the past 2 months. And it's like, wow, we just can't do that anymore. I mean, so much shit happens every week that it's like we really can't go back too far past what happened at the Capitol. I mean, if we want to maybe discuss what led to that event a little bit, we certainly can. But Vin, I mean, we can start with you. I don't even know where to begin. I'm being perfectly honest. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, I just want to begin on a note of sadness. The Capitol's a building that means something to me. Look, it means something different to all of us, right? So I'm not about to say that, it doesn't mean anything to you guys. It means something different to all of us. This is a building I've spent a great deal of time in, whether it was as a reporter or whether it was lobbying, whatever the situation is. I've spent a great deal of time in that building. I've been in the bowels of the building. I've been in the different office buildings there. I've had congressmen usher me in, with their pins and sort of getting around security. And I've gone in as a tourist. This is truly a hallowed hall for me. And so to watch a mob, and not only a mob, but a well-organized mob, breached the Capitol so easily was scary. It was upsetting. It was scary. It was upsetting. It enraged me on a certain level. Look, I used to run around the Capitol and up through the Capitol all the time. And, if I even blinked the wrong way, when I got to the Capitol steps, the Capitol Police were going to be there to put me down. And the idea that it could be breached so easily is extremely upsetting. And as upsetting is the fact that it seems, and I'll sort of end it on this note. It seems that part of the reason why, if you take a look at the way right-wing protests happen and the way left-wing protests happen, there's an expectation from the protesters that the cops are on their side. And when they discover that the cops aren't on their side, you know, there are repercussions. And the fact that you had policemen and military personnel that would badge their way in or showing their badge and say, don't worry, we're here to do some, just let us in, you know, we're here to do some stuff here. I mean, the idea that, you know, it was that level of things going on, I just find extremely upsetting. And so, yeah, I'm upset, I'm angry, I'm enraged. I'm sad for our country. I'm sad for what this means for us throughout the world, because it really endangers a lot of our position all over the world. But yeah, that pretty much sums it up. I'm extremely upset.
For sure. Yeah, it is interesting about the police. I mean, the Capitol Police, certainly some of them were trying to do their job and some of them clearly were not. And you know, and they kind of have to choose where their loyalties lie at this point. Mark, what were your reactions to what you saw this past week?
Well, I'm a student of history, and it's a coincidence that I'm currently reading a rather remarkable 2-volume biography of Adolf Hitler. And in the first volume, it discusses the years prior to the time that the Second World War started. And it talked about how Hitler and members of the Nazi Party got the support of the populace and created an anxiety and a fervent militaristic, non-normal human reaction to stimuli that were provided for them. I don't know how many of you were able to watch former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger of California, who gave a very interesting talk, how upset he was. And he compared what took place in the Capitol to what took place in Nazi Germany in November of 1938, which was a time called Kristallnacht. And it was the night of broken glass. And it was set up by the Nazis. It was an anti-Jewish campaign. And it was blaming, in this particular case, the Jews for all the problems the Germans had at the time. And crowds started to gather and create disturbance, and it built. And the worst parts of human nature, where the adrenaline starts running and people are in mobs and they don't think, they react. And this reminded me, to a degree, the psychological and also the physical impact of what took place in November of 1938. And it's very, very scary. However, I am encouraged by the reaction of so many people across the political spectrum that viewed what took place and said, this is not what we want our America to be. And I'm upset, I'm frightened, and I'm also hopeful that people with sound mind and calm nerve bring us back, and it's going to take a period of time, to this extraordinary country that we live in that provides the four of us with the opportunity to live the kind of lives that we live. And we cannot allow, and millions of us like us, millions of people like us, cannot allow the psychosis that took place last Wednesday to ever take place again. And that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, Mark, I'd like to say I'm encouraged by the response of people, and I am encouraged by the response of some people, but I am very discouraged by the responses of others. People that should otherwise know better are sitting here talking about how, oh, it was Antifa that did this, it was Antifa people that infiltrated the protest. It is about how we should talk about reconciliation. This is a time for President-elect Biden to reconcile the country. Well, reconcile it from what? And from whom? And how did we get to this place in the first place? And where's the accountability of the people for whom this was done, or who egged them on, or who created this environment? It's almost like they're saying, forget the last few days, just be nice to us moving forward and everything will be okay. And so on the one hand, I mean, I am encouraged to see people like Representative Cheney thinking about voting for impeachment, saying it's an impeachable offense. It is, it is heartening to see someone like Senator Toomey say, yeah, this is an impeachable offense, and stand up for what is good and what is decent. But on the other hand, I mean, to see representatives and senators vote not once, but twice to object to certain states being certified after this happened shows a complete lack of awareness. And actually, I'll take it even further. I won't even say a lack of awareness, a willingness to make a cold calculation that it is better to throw in their lot with these people to maintain their votes than it is to stand up to do the right thing.
I don't disagree with you. These people drank the Kool-Aid, and the people that were the millions that exist in this country that believe that the election was fraudulent, that believe the things that Trump says, that believe the things that Giuliani says. There are millions and millions of them, and they don't use their brains. The people that have the brains to use, the politicians that you're talking about, who are more concerned about their political future and the power, whether it be theoretical or real, and a great deal of it is real, that Trump has, and the number of people that follow him, they're more concerned about their future than the future of this country, and that's very frightening. The encouraging thing is the people that you talked about, the Liz Cheneys and the Pat Toomeys and some of the other people, and every day there seem to be more of them. And I believe after next Wednesday, a bunch of them will come out from under the corners that they're hiding, and they will disavow Trump just the way many Germans came out from hiding and disavowed Hitler after the Second World War. That doesn't mean that they didn't participate and they didn't know exactly what they were doing when they were doing it. This is not something that's going to be okay because Joe Biden is calm and controlled and has worked across the aisle in the past, that, okay, we're now going to be nice to each other and everything's going to be okay in a couple of months. That's not what it's going to be. Our country, and therefore in the world within which the four of us live, is going to be very different than it was a year ago or 4 years ago or 2 months ago. And it's not something that's going to be okay in a short period of time. It's going to take time, hard work, and a lot of people who use their heads and not their emotions and move forward slowly and deliberately, recognizing that they're going to have to take some steps back. And when the bad things happen, do something about it. And I think that what took place last week, and some of what might take place in the next week, if some of these people that are going to do some of the things that they've said they're going to do, it has to be dealt with. And it has to be dealt with under a rule of law, but with people using their heads and people of different political persuasion, but Americans who love this country, who go about working to get us back to a new normal. Now, I'm 72 years old. I do not expect to be the country that it was when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, but I look forward to my grandson, and I'm hoping and praying that he's going to have a world in this country, but it isn't going to be easy.
We're definitely going to take a long look at what lies ahead for us. But before we jump into the future, I want to throw out that, the misinformation that started all this is not showing any signs of stopping, right? And Nolan, I mean, I'll throw this to you. I mean, Antifa, right? The claim that Antifa was involved somehow. First of all, you have on your social media page, you say, I am Antifa. I don't think half the people even get the irony of what you're saying, that like you're anti-fascist. Yeah, that's, since when did that get labeled a bad thing? Number one. Number two, if I wanted to go on the internet, yeah, I want to join Antifa. It doesn't exist, right? There is no organization of Antifa. So where will this misinformation ever end? Like, how do you feel about what got us to here, Nolan?
Well, thank you. I have pretty deep political roots and convictions. And long before Antifa was in the headlines and maligned largely and so widely misunderstood, I actually did try to join Antifa. I'm quite serious about this. But this goes back 3 or 4 years when supposedly this organization, which it doesn't exist, as you say, it's really just a loose confederation of ideas of a lot of people like myself who are very concerned with the rise of the militant political right in this country. Far right, alt-right, fueled often by the channels of disinformation through, I call it crackpot media. And I don't think there's any other, I didn't want to be hyperbolic in some of my descriptive, but I don't think there's anything else you can call it. And let's just talk about this movement today. 74 million people voted for Trump, somewhere in that range. Now, are all 74 million of those people far-right fanatics? No. In fact, I reluctantly, I have to say, there's probably a lot of very good people who are led astray, misunderstand, maybe they're apolitical, maybe they are actually conservatives on the issues and hold their nose and pull a lever for Trump. There's a lot of that out there. So I'm willing to concede that. However, there has always been a dangerous far-right element in the United States going back to its foundations. Have you heard of something called the Confederacy, ladies and gentlemen? We had a civil war that was fought by essentially states' rights, conservatives, small government, the same messages we're hearing today. Now, of course, that was tinged with blatant racism and over slavery. Reconstruction era, same thing, conservatives, always on the wrong side of history. I could go through on and on. The McCarthy era, who were the people that were pushing the Red Scare and the Sedition Act going back, say, to after World War I? Conservatives mostly. The anti-war movement was maligned by what? Who were the pro-Vietnam people? They were conservatives. They were the militants. And that's morphed into the Reagan conservatives. And then it became the Tea Party about 15 years ago. And then there was this movement, a lot of them evangelicals, a lot of them so-called patriots, some people that actually, I think, have fundamentally not ideas that I agree with, but at least I can concede, I call them William F. Buckley conservatives, or country club conservatives, Rockefeller Republicans. There is that element in there that I do respect. But Trump essentially in 2015, when he announced for the presidency, he completely usurped something that I never would have thought, especially a charlatan and a con man like this, to be able to fool a lot of very smart people and essentially, again, usurp the baton and take the conservative movement, the Republican Party, and he's completely grabbed and got them all, as I forgot who said this, maybe it was Mark, they're cowering under rocks, terrified to speak out, worried about their own political future, that if they upset any kind of base, they'll get primaried. There's a lot of ramifications of that. So we are in an era that I never thought I would see, where the Republican Party has been completely hijacked, usurped, grabbed by the Trumpsters. And now we're in this moment where, oh my goodness, we've never been here before. What's going to happen next?
All right, so just a prediction for the immediate future then. I don't want to jump the gun too much here, but people Republicans are clearly not voting their conscience. Largely, they're voting their political futures. Are they voting to not alienate their base, or Are they voting because they're afraid of Trump's wrath still, even though he's suspended from Twitter at this moment? Like, it seemed like that was a large component of it to this point, was that if you spoke out against Trump, suddenly he's going to start using your name in his tweets, and then you have to worry about yourself. Now that's been mitigated a little bit. So now the inauguration happens, hopefully. God knows what's going to happen over the next week or whatnot. But the Biden becomes president, Trump leaves the White House. Are people going to flip on a dime? Is it going to be a gradual progression? What do you think, Vin?
Well, there's a lot to unpack in that question. So let me try and do a little bit of that, and I'm going to respect the 2-minute rule, and so I won't get into some of what Nolan said.
I broke it already too.
But in terms of that, look, Trump's Twitter account. I mean, look, this is the calmest the country's been in a long time because President Trump hasn't been on Twitter. And so that's played a large role in all of this, and a willingness for people to suddenly find their courage and speak out. The fact of the matter is, in the political environment that we're in and the way our districts are gerrymandered, most, not all, but most political candidates are far worried on left and right, are far worried about primary challenges than they are about general elections. This didn't used to be the case. It used to be the exact opposite. People used to worry about the general election, and they didn't worry that much about the primary. They're far more worried about primary challenges than they are about general elections. What does that mean? It means that you pander hard to your base. And there are a lot of reasons we can get into this, why gerrymandering isn't the only reason. The way the rules of Congress are set up now, the elimination of earmarks, the elimination of pork, it makes it, there's no point in negotiating. Everything's a purity test. I mean, there's all sorts of things that have come in to create this environment. But yes, they're worried about primary. They were worried about the Twitter account. They're worried about being primary. They're worried about their political future. There are far more people. Political Science 101 says when you get elected, the very first thing you worry about is re-election. And this is part of the behavior that you expect out of Congress. This is what is going to drive not all votes, but a good chunk of them. I think there are maybe about 20 Republicans in the House who are saying they're considering voting for impeachment. Right now, you've got 3 or 4 in the Senate that are considering voting for impeachment. Morally, it's the obvious thing to do. The political calculation always gets in the way. Just look at the House Minority Leader, and you'll see what I'm saying.
Okay, so let me throw this out there. Like you said, there's about 20 Republicans or so that finally are saying they might support impeachment. When that vote took place after the attack on the Capitol, where I want to say about 125 Republicans in the House, or maybe more, voted to contest the results of the election. So now, and I'll throw this question out there to Mark or whoever wants to answer it. If that was an anonymous vote, this is what scares me. Like, I can sort of justify that if they have to put their name next to the vote, that they're voting scared and whatnot. I'm scared personally that some of them really believe their own bullshit, or they're starting to. And now if this was an anonymous vote, obviously you're not going to get nearly as many, but are you still going to get this faction of Republicans that honestly believes that the election was stolen? Or like, are they strictly pandering to their base or to Trump? Or is this really starting to seep into their ideology that, even under an anonymous vote, these people would still vote this way?
I've got my theory on it, but Mark, I want you to go first.
My theory is that what we need is certainly under an anonymous vote, it's going to be less. One of the good things that took place, and I'm going to try to keep this to as close to the time limit as I can. One of the good things that took place last Wednesday is that Donald Trump went into the doctor's office and had an operation towards being neutered. He does not have the power of the bully pulpit. He did it to himself. Okay, for people to run. For people within his cabinet to resign. He opened the door. Okay, now what it's going to take, and I don't know, we need more people like a Liz Cheney. We need leadership, leaders who will get up and say the kinds of things that make logical sense, that provide comfort to those who want to believe without using their heads. You need 10, 15, 20 Republican leaders that come from the conservative bent who say, no, this was a legitimate election. There wasn't fraud. We pursued everything in the courts that could be pursued and allowed for, where Trump says there were 400,000 votes of dead people or whatever in the hell he said, that was 400,000 votes. Fine. Bring it into court and give us a list of the 400,000. And believe me, there'll be plenty of people to look it up. And it didn't take place. And every assertion that was made had an opportunity to be backed up with fact. And it wasn't. Now we need leadership and we need some charisma, okay? And some people who haven't gone into the doctor's office to be neutered to stand up and say what it is.
I think that's a good point about needing charisma, because I mean, Mitch McConnell has the charisma of a freaking snail. I mean, so, you know, and he stood, I mean, that's why the Republican Party is fractured right now, is what you're describing, Mark. I mean, there are a certain number of Republican leaders that have tried to stand up, and it's just not changing the minds of some people.
All right, I have to step in here because I question just how fractured the Republican Party is.
Okay.
I think the Republican Party on the surface looks very fractured, but let's understand the power of President Trump over the past 4 years, or the past 6 years, or the past decade, depending on how far back you want to go with it. The power of President Trump was he said the quiet part out loud. Right. This is the ultimate power of President Trump. He said the quiet part out loud. The stuff that Republicans believed or would embrace with a wink or a nod, or whatever it is, President Trump would openly support. There has been a strain of racism in the Republican Party that goes back generations. All right. You go back to, I mean, you can trace, look, we've been relitigating the period of 1965 to 1975 for the last 40 years, 45 years. It's ridiculous. But I mean, if you really want to dig into it, I mean, just look at the Southern strategy embraced by Nixon. Look at the gerrymandering that's happened after that. Look, I wrote a paper in 1993, 1992, somewhere in there, that talked about how the Republican Party could get a permanent majority in the United States. Think about this. The Republican Party, in my mind, back in 1993, 1994, were, you know, 1 or 2 elections away from establishing a permanent majority in the country if they just stopped being racist doofuses. Because a lot of their policies appeal across race, across ethnicity, across income class, a lot of this sort of stuff. And they just had to stop being idiots, but they can't, they're just unable to do that, because a lot of the racism underpins our Republican policy. And so, yes, there are honorable conservatives, Republicans who don't buy into it. But this coalition has been driven by grievance politics and by racism, not overt, but it's been there, and it's been a through line through this party's history. And President Trump said the quiet part out loud, and that's part of why he had the power that he did.
Well, that's true. And the good thing is, then there are, as days go on and the years go on, the percentage of the population of this country that could have made that Republican majority in the early 90s that didn't take advantage of it, they're dwindling.
Agreed.
And the color of the skin of Americans is changing. All of the colors are going to be more than those white people that are still hiding under the rocks. And as that time comes, assuming that we can find leaders who can communicate with these people. Not everybody that's black believes the same thing. Not everybody that's Indian believes the same thing. Not everybody that's Hispanic believes the same thing. We need to understand that people are people. And if we reach out to these people and find leaders who have the ability to have command of the language, and we can reach them. Trump, intentionally or not, had a genius in his charisma to be able to say the things and reach the people by the tens of millions that he did. Let's learn not just from his lesson, but from the lesson of the other charismatic leaders that we've been able to listen to and view, and who had command of the language over the years, and have those people rise, and let us support them and provide opportunities for people to listen. Not many won't the first time around.
Yeah.
But we have good things are going to come from what took place last Wednesday.
Yeah, I think good things will come from things that happen on Wednesday, but I also think the good things come from sort of a realm of brutal honesty, right? President Trump's, I mean, look, a lot of what we see, to me, a lot of what happened in the President Trump administration was a direct backlash to President Obama in the Obama administration. And I think it's fair to characterize it as that. And let me tell you what, the policies espoused by the Obama administration weren't particularly egregious. They weren't left-wing radical solutions of any nature, yet they were painted that way. President Trump's rise to power was born out of birtherism. Let me tell you what, the way he described the good people on many sides in Charlottesville wasn't an accident. And the fact of the matter is, if you take a look at what happened at the Capitol, all right, what did you see? You saw a QAnon and you saw a Confederate flag being waved in the halls of Congress, all right? We fought a civil war to keep the Confederate flag out. This is the first time the Confederate flag has ever flown in the Capitol. This is ridiculous. It was heartbreaking. And so until, as a nation, as a society, as a group of people, we decide as a group to come to grips with our past and our future, our past racism and our future as a multicultural society. Until we make that conscious decision, whether it's through leadership and charisma, or whether it's frankly through baby boomers aging out of power and finally passing the baton, whatever it is, whatever that mix is, until that happens, we're not going anywhere.
So let me ask, good points, by the way, of both of you. And Nolan, I'm going to toss this to you as somebody that had also spent part of his life around Washington. I mean, I share Vin's feeling about when I saw the Confederate flag in the Capitol. On the one hand, I share that feeling. On the other hand, I look at this group of people, and I don't know if you saw that supposedly Donald Trump was upset as it was going on by looking at the crowd and saying how low class they looked. Like he wanted a better class of people to be rebelling for him, right? And even though that wasn't my first reaction, that was kind of my reaction too. I'm like, this is your support, these fucking people here, like these are the people that you're basing your political future on. And even he could tell that this was not an organized, even though there was some organization to what happened, this is not, I don't think, a group of people you have to fear in the grand scheme of things as being some organized Confederate group. Well, okay, well, I'll throw this to Nolan then. Let's see.
I disagree strongly.
Okay.
It's funny, my background goes back not quite as far as Mark's, but I have a degree in political science and I've worked in politics a good part of my life, as you noted. And I always admit when I like to admit when I'm wrong. One of the things I believed in for the first 25 years or so of my political activism was the virtue of populism. And essentially that means ground roots activism essentially rather than elitism or, say from the bottom up, the top down. That's the way essentially a democracy is supposed to work. Power to the people, all that. Well, that sounds good and noble. And I realize how dangerous populism is also. And I think that's what we're learning here, is that those people in the streets wearing military camouflage and in some cases carrying assault rifles and loaded with pipe bombs and Molotov cocktails in their cars, many of them, by the way, not just a few of them, many of them, breaking windows, storming, urinating in the hallways, tearing up, threatening to kill the vice president, the Republican vice president of the United States. Really? Seriously? I mean, and that is not a small movement. That is essentially the spear of populism. And unfortunately, and I lived through a revolution one time back in '89 in Romania. And one thing that I took away from that experience, watching a government fall, watching people storm a government building and take control, believe me, it is frightening. And it doesn't matter what side you're on, because innocent people often get hurt, and it's completely chaotic, and you don't know what's going to happen. And we damn near came to that in this country, last week. And I don't think people again realize if that would have been a little better orchestrated and a couple of people would have been toppled, you don't know what would have happened, especially if the military or the establishment or certain cabal of people were behind it. Fortunately, they weren't. Fortunately, the line of defense, the guardrails of democracy, held this flaming car that's going down the highway. But what I see here is that populism is always going to be with us, and unfortunately, I think a lot of those people. I'll leave this and then throw it back to either Mark or Vin. I think what we're stuck with here is a lot of people who never would have been political activists. A lot of young men in their 20s, young white working class men in their 20s, they never would have been politically active except for Donald Trump. And he mobilized millions of those young men who see their country supposedly slipping away. That's the lie they've been told. And so now they are, unfortunately, they're with us for a very long time. And I don't think they're going to be converted. I don't think their passion's going to dissipate. I think we've got a real problem with this group. And again, fueled by right-wing radio and the media, the alt universe of the Alex Joneses and QAnon and all that, that fire is going to continue to burn. And that's what scares the hell out of me.
And it should. And it's a fire that's burned throughout history. Okay. We have had demagogues. We've had a number of them in the United States. Some of them, one very recently, who actually came to great power. Many of them didn't, but they tried. I want to suggest to the people that log in and watch this podcast over time to take a few minutes and go to the library or go online and read a book called The True Believer. It was written in the early 60s, and it talks about the mentality of people that believe in mass movements, regardless of what the mass movement is. And there's a commonality among them. And I'm gonna use your word of populism to parallel what Eric Hoffer talked about in these True Believers. And it's very scary. And people want to be led. There's given to them. They don't want to have to think. They don't want to have to work. So we need leaders. I'm going to tell you what the solution is. I said it earlier in this podcast. We need leaders who are articulate, who are charismatic, who will speak not just truth to power, but truth to reality. And if they say it, the truth with facts enough times, then it will get through just the way the demagogue over the last 4 years kept saying virtual lies so many times over and over and over again that people believed it because he said it. if there were over 100 members of the House of Representatives, well-educated, many of them lawyers, I'm ashamed to say, who voted to not approve the certification of the election in states, so many of them, okay? These people are true believers. Well, put some water on your face. You've been educated. Stop and listen and think. And if you want to change things for some of the things that you would like to see changed, hopefully for the better, then use your head and open your ears and don't get caught up in the crowds and the bullshit that has taken place over the last number of years.
Yeah, one of the things I say consistently.
I'll drink to that, by the way. Sorry, Vince.
That's all right. One of the things I
You'll
say.
drink to anything.
One of the things I say consistently is never has it been easier in the world to start a cult. I really believe that in this environment, it is supremely easy to start a cult. And I actually really believe that the Republican leadership didn't understand this. Because if you talk to the Republican leadership privately, and believe me, a lot of us do, including me, if you talk to the Republican leadership privately, or former members of Congress or whoever it is, they will say one thing. They'll say, yeah, we know this is terrible, and we know that the election wasn't rigged, and we know the election stolen, all that sort of stuff. But then they'll turn around and publicly they'll spew a different line. And because they're playing a game, they're fundraising off of this. They're amassing power off of this. They're gaining votes off of this. They're playing a game.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I would normally not interrupt you, but it's funny about something. I just have to, Vin. Forgive me. Mm-hmm. We're 42 minutes into the podcast, and you just said the word fundraising. You know what? A lot of us forgot about that because there's so much else going on here. Yep. There are some people profiting off of this. Activists, obviously the Trump campaign. I just want to I want to pound that and put it in parenthesis. Yeah, what you just said there. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, look, the Trump campaign's been fundraising off of this whole voter fraud, the election was rigged thing the entire time and lining the pockets of the Trump super PAC. But they've been fundraising off of, they've been doing all of this. And the assumption they made was that their voters are playing the same game they were. And that was a bad assumption because it turns out the voters actually believe it. All right, take a look at what's happening in Arizona right now. I think it's the Republican Party in Maricopa County censored Meghan McCain for, defending her dad and just saying, Republicans shouldn't believe in this sort of violence and that sort of thing. Just how ridiculous is that? But the Republican leadership has been playing a game. And they've been thinking their voters have been playing a game too. And no, it turns out the voters, if you tell the voters this over and over and over and over again, they're going to believe it. And this comes back to what I said earlier. It's never been easier to start a cult in America than it is right now. And, I've half joked about, setting up a website and coming up with my own doctrine and going on social media and spreading it and seeing how much money I could make and how many people I could get to follow me. And I don't do it because I'm a responsible human being that doesn't want to destroy society. But when it comes right down to it, the environment is ripe for it. And this is exactly what's happened over the course. If you repeat something over the course of 20, 30 years, people start believing it. If you repeat the fact that Democrats are socialists, communists who are out to change America and change American values and are fundamentally un-American, all right, you want to know what's going to happen? 65% of Republicans, when you poll them and survey them, are going to say exactly the same thing. They're going to start viewing the other side as the enemy. And so until we're able to dial that rhetoric back and dial that aspect of that back, and as Mark said, find leaders who are not only willing to spend truth to power, but speak the truth, period. Mm-hmm. Until we get that, we're going to struggle, because that's what needs to happen. And there needs to be a lot of truth telling from both sides of this. But it starts with the Republican Party.
Well, that's a good lead into, I guess, looking ahead to the future. I mean, a lot of the talk is like, well, Trump has mobilized this movement, and look at how flawed he is. Now, if you get somebody with the same lack of morals, but a little bit smarter and maybe similarly charismatic. Well, yeah, I suppose, but thankfully he's being kind of, dragged through the mud at the moment. So I mean, that's one end of the spectrum of what could happen. On the other end is what Mark's describing, where maybe there will be charismatic Republicans with morals, which would be nice, to actually have that. I can't think of too many off the top of my head. Mitt Romney, perhaps, although his charisma doesn't quite match up to the other guys. So Nolan, should I throw it over to you now in terms of looking ahead to the future? Where do you see it heading, possibly in the immediate future? Well, we still have a week to go. Like, to anybody watching this in the future, we're speaking now a week before the inauguration. So there could still be a lot of shit that happens, and everything we say today could be obsolete a week from now. But let's give it our best shot. Nolan, what do you see as the immediate future?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, gentlemen, for, I think, a really spirited, very informative discussion the first half of this. Now we're going to, our idea was to essentially say, Matt was going to take a look, to how we got to now. And then Nolan, I was going to take it like looking forward with some of our predictions. Now we've touched on some predictions already. I'm going to, actually, I have kind of a laundry list of questions I want to ask our guest. And Matt, now you're going to be much more, we'd like to have your opinion here. So you're going to be the target here. Here we go. You've been dying to get in. So I'm going to hold you though to a 90-second rule. So again, be cognizant of because this is where I get more questions in. It's just purely selfish.
Notice the time limit keeps going down.
2 minutes didn't work. 2 minutes did not work. You guys had some great stuff to say.
Okay, it's my fault. It's
No,
my
it's
fault.
not.
No,
It's not anyone's fault.
No, absolutely not. Listen, let's just move on. 90 seconds. All right, here we go. There have been threats of violence on social media and far-right websites. Even the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security have warned that the period coming up here, again, in a few days, as Matt Lessinger said, the period January 16th to the 20th, which is the Biden administration inauguration, there have been threats that all 50 state capitals are potentially under attack by potentially armed militias. Again, this is not, the FBI doesn't put these things out unless these are credible threats. And even certainly in the District of Columbia, there is a threat of disruption there in the inauguration day. In other words, we haven't seen what we saw last Wednesday. So my question now to the panel is, Lessinger, I'm going to let you go first on this since you've been dying to get in. What do you think could and will happen regarding the state capitals and the inauguration, strictly with regard to this threat?
Well, I'll start the answer by clarifying something I said before. It's not that I don't fear these people in general. It's that when I said that Trump was looking at them sort of with disdain, it's like, just imagine if they had been a little more organized. Imagine if they had had a little more leadership. Like, they did everything they did, and they were a pretty ragtag group. I mean, they were in a large number, but it could have been a lot worse. I mean, yes, it was already pretty bad.
Imagine if they would have broken into the Senate chamber.
Right. I mean,
it would be a very different world right now.
Right.
They were a quick thinking cop away from that happening.
Well,
right. The one that led them away.
What if this movement had smart people behind it?
Right. Well, so that's where I'm going with my answer, right? Where it's like, you had pretty much everything in place, where it's like you had all these people mobilized in Washington with like weeks of notice, and you had Trump and his son and Giuliani saying, trial by combat and all that bullshit. And then they came up and they did some serious damage, but nobody died. No politicians died. Let me start with that. 5 people did die, which is tragic, and it should have never gotten to that point. Now you're dividing this ragtag group by 50, right? I'm not saying it's those exact people, but it's like, you're taking the best of each state, and I say that very loosely, and they're going to go march on the Capitol. I can't see it being that organized of a event. I think the weaker, how do I put this? Like the places like Albany and Sacramento and places like that are going to be much more ready to deal with this, and Austin and perhaps Tallahassee, they'll be more ready to deal with it than places like, Des Moines, Iowa, or Lincoln, Nebraska, or I'm just throwing things out there, or Juneau, Alaska. They're not going to be ready to deal with armed people showing up at the door, but there might also be less of them. So do I fear like the toppling of the state capitals? No, not really. I'm more fearful of the inauguration. I saw a great quote where it's like Biden and Harris should just go to Las Vegas and have a inauguration in Las Vegas and be done with it, like a drive-through, just like a drive-through wedding. Like, I don't think there should be the big inauguration. They should just do it in Delaware for real, or something like that. The inauguration is my bigger worry. I don't think they should do it business as usual. That's my opinion. It looks like right now they're going to go forward with it. We'll see what happens.
Mark Tenner.
Yes.
You're quite asking
what
me
do I think?
What do you think is going to happen?
Okay, what I think is going to happen is nothing. There will be some minor skirmishes. There'll be some protesters waving flags. We are so forewarned that there will be an overreaction for safety over the next week. The National Guard and there's not a governor in this country who's not aware of the potential of what could happen, that is not going to have National Guard and state police and local police, forgetting the any contribution from Homeland Security and so on. But I believe that we will be over prepared, like that took place last week, they're not going to take place. There'll be some demonstrations. You're going to see Confederate flags. You're going to see some idiots with horns on their heads and paint on their faces screaming and yelling. But you're not going to, it's going to almost be a non-event.
Real quick sidebar, Mark, I have to ask you about this. We saw what happened in Michigan with armed militants taking over the Capitol. I won't even talk about, well, I will for a second, the Michigan governor being threatened to be kidnapped and beheaded. We know about that story. So again, there are certain states that are certainly threatened more than others. Are you worried about the fact that in some states it's legal to carry firearms on Capitol grounds? How does that change your answer, or does it change your answer?
It doesn't change my answer, but I'll answer the first part of your question. Does it worry me? Yes. Okay. I'm one of those people that says if nobody has any guns, nobody can get shot. If one person has a gun, somebody can get shot. If 2 people have a gun, there's a greater chance, and we can do that. We can do that exponentially. So yes, I'm afraid that something could happen. Do I believe it's going to happen? I can't predict the future. I just believe that we are so forewarned that it's going to go through. We're going to have a mini inauguration. It's going to take place. It's going to take place behind fence and Homeland Security and Secret Service and all those kinds of things. I mean, if there were ever a time that a wackadoodle would want to take a shot at Joe Biden, he'd want to kill him on Inauguration Day. That ain't going to happen. It's just they're not going to allow it to happen. We have the skill set if because we know about it. I'm more concerned about what takes place over the next year. And I've got some thoughts about it, but I want to let some other people speak, and then I'll bring up some of the things that I think that might happen, and some of the things that I think that if they do happen, will happen for the good, and will allow some of the better people to rise to the top, and some of the crazies to not have the opportunity to be crazy.
Note to self, note to Matt Lessinger, future broadcast. We're going to discuss, that's a really great one, Nick, because we can't possibly do it. We have to give a whole show to it. What's going to happen the first year of, say, the Biden administration? Mark Tenner, you just introduced a great topic for show 12 or 13. Let's just hold that thought because there's a lot to go with on that, although we'll get your cliff notes on that. Vin, question was, what do you think will happen in the next 4 to 5 days?
All right, so Nolan, you brought up an excellent point. The conspiracy to kidnap and kill Governor Whitmer in Michigan. Underreported, underappreciated in terms of just how extensive and serious that was. Similarly, what's gone underreported and underappreciated about the Capitol riots was, one, just how close they were to breaching the Senate, which would have been a game changer. And then two, is the fact that there were pipe bombs outside the RNC and DNC. There were Molotov cocktails. There was a trailer with a cache of weapons discovered, right? So these weren't unorganized events. I mean, this takes a level of organization to pull that off. That said, I mean, look, I agree with Mark. I don't think there's anything going to happen at the inauguration. I think the inauguration is going to be sealed up. There's nothing that's going to happen there. I do worry, though, about violence outside of Washington, D.C., whether it's throughout the country, not because I don't think that there isn't forewarning or the National Guard is going to be out or that sort of thing. I just think that you want to know what, if someone was crazy enough to build a pipe bomb and try and bomb the RNC or the DNC, you know, there might be someone crazy enough to do it somewhere else where, you know, there's less fortification, you know, there's less chance of getting caught, less chance of blowing up. Do I think it's going to happen? Probably. I'd like to think it's not going to happen, but I'm not willing to say that, yeah, you know, I don't see it happening because we've got angry people. We've got people that believe the country was stolen from them. We have people that believe that the election was stolen from them. We have people that believe that the country is going in the wrong direction. Look, this crazy woman from the QAnon congresswoman from Colorado, you know, tweeting at 1776 here. Well, 1776 is code in sort of right-wing online circles for overthrowing the government, revolution. All right. This is what's going on out there. So, you know, am I hopeful that the states are prepared and with forewarning and we'll have the National Guard called up and all that stuff? Yes, I am. But I'm equally scared if it's not over the next few days, over the next few months, of a pipe bomb going off, of bombs going off, of a violent confrontation somewhere. I think that's very much a possibility.
I'm just, sorry, if I could just say one thing in response to what you guys said. I mean, I think one thing that the attack on the Capitol showed us is like, you know, the idea that we would have more of a local police presence or state police presence, we don't know if that's good or bad. I mean, you had enough of a share of the Capitol Police that were basically in on what happened. I'm not trying to bash police here, but I'm just because I am a supporter of the police in general. But there's going to be enough police on a local level that are going to support what these protesters are doing that their mere presence there doesn't give me any comfort that they're going to help suppress what may happen.
There was a
I think it's a question. I think it's a question of degree. I mean, like I said, I think it's going to be okay. That doesn't mean that there aren't going to be events. Okay. This is an oversimplification, but there are more horses' asses in the world than there are horses. So some of those horses' asses, okay, are going to try to get their 15 minutes of fame, and some of them will probably be successful. But I mean, I don't want to dismiss the importance of this, and we're talking about this from the the political nature and the future of our country in terms of, our democracy and our republic and so on. But I also want to put this in the context of, we're focusing on this today. And some people may very well die in the next week from isolated incidents and conflict between right and left wing wackadoodles. 4,000 people died today from COVID. Okay, the focus is where it should be, but it's not the only focus that we have to have.
Great segue into my next question. I'm going to be very Machiavellian, and that's a term that anybody who's worked in politics will understand. And essentially that means that the ends justify the means, so to speak. In other words, to attain power, keep power, to do good, supposedly, you break a few rules. And so that's essentially the idea behind this. And whenever I look at things, you have to look through the prism of, well, first of all, what's the truth, what's right, and then the prism of, there are a lot of different prisms to look through. And I think the good thing about this panel is we're probably able to look through different prisms. So I want you to essentially take off your activist or in some cases journalistic hats here, and I want you just to speak clearly in terms of a Machiavellian political operative. You work for the DNC, let's say, or you work for, let's say, the Biden campaign or the transition team. Let's just put yourself in that role for a moment. And you're watching all these events over the last week. Now, is this in many ways again, Machiavellian term, gift to the incoming Biden administration, particularly with regard to the inauguration? And let me explain what I'm talking about. The inauguration restrictions that are already going to be in place due to COVID, in other words, you can't have all these parties and balls and all of this fanfare. I think that would have looked very bad in middle America, where there are a lot of people are out of work. They don't know how they're going to pay their mortgage. Their kids are out of school. I mean, there are people suffering in this country, and the last thing that they want to see, I don't care if they're red or blue or what purple or whatever, they don't want to see a bunch of big fat cats in Washington dancing to an orchestra or whoever it is celebrating, and that's what we get usually with inaugurations. Now that's off the table now, and it's really off the table because of the events of the last week. In other words, there's no celebration here. Now, is that a blessing in disguise in terms of, again, the purely Machiavellian perceptions here of the public and the Biden administration going forward, that they don't have to go through all of that ritual? Who wants to take that first?
I mean, yeah. So I sort of look at, I don't know if this answers your question exactly, but I mean, Biden was chosen by the DNC, basically, right? I mean, he's calling for unity, and that's slightly tone deaf, right? At this point in time, like we're not feeling that right now. I don't think anybody is, but that's the reason why the DNC chose him over the other candidates, right? I was a Bernie Sanders supporter. I would have liked to see Bernie win. I get why Biden was chosen, and he is right for this moment. And he's not the celebratory type anyway, right? So it's like, let him be slightly tone deaf and slightly removed from everything. And when I say removed, I don't mean in like some lofty way. I just mean like, he could be the one that is more about, hey guys, let's come together. Let's unite the country. But meanwhile, other Democrats are going to be doing the dirty work, especially over the next week or two, that I think is almost going to make the inauguration seem like an afterthought. I mean, there's going to be a lot of, between the potential impeachment and they're going after specific Republicans for incitement. I mean, so let the Elizabeth Warrens and the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes of the world make sure that Republicans and their followers pay the price for what has happened, right? We're still prosecuting the people that made it into the Capitol building. But no other Democratic leader other than Biden could really talk about coming together and be taken seriously, right? I mean, this has always been his message, like, let's come together. So I feel like he can still maintain that message. And I agree with you, like with no parties or whatever, he's never going to come across as elitist, right? He's never come across that way anyway. I mean, he's from Scranton, for Christ's sake. So, I mean, so this is perfect for him. I agree with that. I don't even know if it took everything that you're describing, because I don't think he or Kamala Harris would have been involved with these parties so much anyway. But yes, this is a blessing in disguise for him, I would say.
All right, Mark Tenner, the question to you, and again, don't get ahead of me, because we will discuss some of the things about what the Democratic-controlled House and Senate will do. We'll get to that in a moment. The question was, is this a blessing in disguise for the Democrats, what happened last week?
Yes, and I don't think this was Machiavellian, because I don't
The way you look at it,
created this event.
Yeah,
I know what I understand. Yeah, it's going to be a blessing in disguise, and it's an unintentional blessing, because you're going to have a guy like Biden who's going to stand up and he's going to say, this shit is terrible. This is not America. This is not who we are. But I'm going to focus on the things that we need to focus on today. Okay, and there's really three things that have to happen, and this is where the blessing comes in, and this becomes a much longer discussion in a future podcast in terms of what's going to take place over the next year or two and how it's going to work. Okay, but three things have to happen, and Biden's going to try to make them happen, and to some degree they will. There has to be, the number one priority is the distribution of the vaccine and getting the American populace vaccinated. That's a major undertaking. Number two, there has to be a program to provide economic survival for millions and millions of people who have been unintentionally, by any actions that they took, the victims of this incredible pandemic that hasn't existed in over 100 years. And the third thing that has to happen is there has to be a massive infrastructure bill that's got to get passed, that I think will get passed in some form, that's going to help number two, because it's going to provide millions of jobs, besides making it so that buildings don't fall down and bridges don't collapse and people don't get killed under freeways and so on. And that's the blessing, is that somebody's going to get up there who's going to say, this was awful and I hate it. And I'm going to allow the people whose job it is to investigate it and prosecute it to do their job. What I want to focus on is what we need to do right now. And those are the three things that I just mentioned. And they aren't that simple, but they are the critical nature of what's going to allow this country to prosper for the next several decades.
Man, if I was on trial for something, I would have Mark Tenner make my closing argument. Very well said, sir. Then Narayanan, the question was.
Yeah, I got it. Mark, I had to chuckle when you mentioned the infrastructure bill, because the joke was, every week was infrastructure week during the Trump administration. And I also feel like that if you go back 30 years, and this includes, the senior Bush, the Clinton administration, the younger Bush, Obama, Trump, I feel like we've been promised a massive infrastructure bill every year for the last 30 years.
Yeah, but there's a difference, Vin, and I want to point it out, and then I'm going to shut up and let you continue. And every time that they promised this, through every administration, Democratic and Republican, nobody was willing to pay the cost that it was going to be. They wanted to kick the can down the road because, God, look what's going to happen to the deficit. We don't want to spend the money. Well, when the shit hit the fan with COVID, and we took the deficit over $6 trillion, and nobody's blinking about it, to spend another $5 or $6 trillion they're not going to blink about that either.
I'll tell you what, Mark, I think what we're going to see is we're going to see Republicans rediscover the gospel of fiscal conservatism, and start objecting to everything on the grounds of deficits and debt.
And I agree with you 100% that many of them will. But one of the values that we have in Biden is he'll accept a piece of the pie without fighting to the death for the whole pie.
Yeah, look, I hope you're right, because I'm a big proponent of infrastructure spending.
Okay, and if that infrastructure spending means that 25 or 30 million people have good paying jobs that generate revenue for the economy, and the right person can express it and say that that's going to generate the money, the tax money over time that's going to help pay for some of this stuff, and that the deficit hawks are going to get what they want, which is a reduction in the deficit through the stimulation of an economy. I mean, not that I necessarily agree with that economically, but I can make a hell of a pitch about it.
Oh yeah, you can make a hell of a pitch. I can make a hell of a pitch. Look, you and I probably both been making this pitch for 30 years, and I would like to see it. I would like to believe that that's going to happen. I think perhaps, and this is to get back to answering the question, whether something is Machiavellian all depends on your time frame. So this is something I say about investing all the time. When I talk to people about investing money, I say how you invest all depends on your time frame. How you think about whether something is a Machiavellian all depends on your time frame. And so what do I mean by that? So what I mean is, in the short term, what Mark is talking about is it gives Biden some runway to get some stuff done that he might not have otherwise had. It gives them an opportunity to go after the infrastructure spending. It gives them an opportunity to focus on COVID relief and get that done. And it gives them the opportunity to really fix what's been a mess of a vaccine rollout and try and get shots in the arm. So an opportunity exists for all three that probably didn't exist before this.
And it won't last forever. Let's remember the Republicans, the super conservative Hoover Republicans in 1932 gave FDR a pass for about 2/3 of a year.
Yep.
Okay. And the Machiavellian part of it is Machiavellian said, this is what you do to get what you want. Okay, President Biden, this is what you're going to have to do to get a little piece of what you want while you have an opportunity to get it, because it ain't going to last forever.
Yeah, but the Machiavellian view of what happened over the past week and President Trump's diminished role and diminished power in the Republican Party is actually bad for Democrats. And so if you extend the time frame out, all right, and if you extend the time frame out to 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, what you end up having is a more dynamic, more engaged President Trump would have outsized influence over the Republican Party going into the primary season and going into the presidential election, into the midterm elections and going into the presidential elections. And why is that important? In certain states, it takes historically bad candidates for a Democrat to win. So what am I talking about? Doug Jones in Alabama, he got to beat Judge Moore, right? Historically bad candidate. Warnock in Georgia, going back to the last podcast we were on before all of this said, well, one of the things I said was Kelly Loeffler's a historically bad candidate. It's why I thought Warnock had a chance to win. He beat a historically bad candidate. These are good things. And when you have Trump controlling the base of the party and trotting out purity tests, what you end up with is historically bad candidates that all of a sudden Democrats are competitive with and actually have a chance to win the race because a really bad candidate's been put forward. Similarly, if you have President Trump freezing out the field until 2023, 2024, dangling the idea that he's going to run, keeping his supporters engaged and not coalescing behind other candidates and that sort of thing, it really scrambles the field. You don't end up knowing. You have candidates who aren't sure whether they're going to run, should they run, shouldn't they run. You have calculations of how do you treat President Trump, all of those sorts of things. All of that sort of intrigue has sort of gone away. And so what you end up with is there's a definite short-term boost to President Biden and President Biden's legislative agenda moving forward. But if you extend out the time frame long-term, it certainly hurts the Democratic Party and their chances long-term.
I agree with you, but I'm also hopeful that we get a handful of Republicans that can think and can legislate and recognize. I mean, there are good Republicans, aren't there?
Yes, 100%. Look, if you take a look at where I stand on foreign policy and where I stand on a lot of issues, in theory, I'm centrist enough that I should be voting for Republicans more often than I do. And look, I've been in Democratic politics before I was in journalism, I was in Democratic politics, right? I worked the Dukakis campaign. I worked for Senator Carl Levin in Michigan. I was a writer for Labor Notes, which is the publication in the reform wing of the Teamsters Democratic Union. All of that sort of stuff. So it's not like I haven't lived a life in politics. I have. And yet with all of that, I have a fair amount in common with really centrist Republicans. And there have been Republicans I could have, if things broken right, voted for in presidential campaigns. They didn't break that way, but that possibility's always existed. So it isn't the idea that there aren't good Republicans. There are many good Republicans, but the fact of the matter is that the power base of the Republican Party is much further away from the country, much further away. The activist wing and the power base of the Republican Party is much further away from the center of the country than the power base and activist base of the Democratic Party.
I agree 100%, but because of what took place last week, when Trump shot himself in the foot and he went a bridge too far, we have a window of opportunity. I don't know that window will get opened and somebody will go through it, but at least this son of a bitch shot himself in the foot.
Agreed.
I'm not willing, and I'll throw it back to you, Nolan. It feels like at this moment, this exact moment in time, it feels like he shot himself in the foot. I am not willing to concede that yet, because just because he got censored from Twitter and a handful of Republicans are speaking out against him, is not like we've heard the last of him. Like, he gave his first public statement today in 4 days, and people are clinging on his every word,
Yeah, he showed no remorse.
They showed no remorse, and that was front page news, right? And there's people celebrating that. So, to people, logical thinking people, it's like, this should be the end of Trumpism. I mean, not Trumpism. This should be the end of Trump. But we've been saying that for a long time. That, this should be the thing that ends Trump. And it just hasn't happened for 4 years. And now, he's leaving office, which is certainly going to neuter him even further. But I'm not willing to concede that yet. I hope he's, what I hope is what I described, that as soon as he leaves office, a bunch of Republicans turn on him because they were just afraid of what he could say while he was president. And now he doesn't have that power anymore. And boom, I hope they on a dime just turn. But I don't, that's a hope. That's not what I think will really happen.
Perfect.
I agree with you, but some will. A
Perfect
few will.
moment here to the segue of the next question. And by the way, 30 seconds, gentlemen, on this one, because you can go a little longer, but not too much longer, okay? So because we got some really good stuff to cover here. Let's talk about this, what I call the Spartacus moment. In other words, once you have a crack in the foundation of the loyalty of support for Trump within the Republican Party. Obviously, there's a few Mitch Romneys and Ben Sasses and people out there who raise objections. But now you're seeing actual fracturing. Certainly, you're going to see Republicans in the House voting for impeachment. And now there's talk about an hour before we came on tonight. Now, this is Tuesday night. There was reports that McConnell privately, but the reports are credible, that the president has not talked to McConnell since December, and that McConnell is absolutely furious at the way this situation has come down, and there is possibility, again, possibility with a small p, that some Republican senators could even now, again, you're looking for the Spartacus moment, if you know what I'm talking about, where a few start cracking, and then you start seeing 10, 12, a dozen. All it's going to take is, 10 or so Republicans in the Senate. So the question is very simple, gentlemen. First, should and will, maybe more important, will President Trump be impeached before his term ends in 8 days?
Yes and no. He will be impeached tomorrow. They will vote a bill of impeachment. And I think there is a small modicum of a chance that McConnell will agree for a trial. If he agrees for a trial, it'll happen very fast.
By the way, give us percentages in the Senate, Mark. You're a numbers guy. Give us percentages based on right now.
Well, okay, first of all, it's going to take 16 Republicans if every Democrat votes for impeachment. All right. And there's going to be a Senate trial. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing for this country, we don't need to talk about that right now. It's going to happen. The House is going to vote a bill of impeachment tomorrow. Now the question is, will the Senate have a trial before or after Trump is out of office? In order for there to be a trial, McConnell has to agree to a trial. Schumer's already said he agrees. If the majority and the minority leader agree, they call Senate into a special session. It'll be a trial, it'll be a 1 or a 2 day trial, and that'll be the end of it. And if McConnell supports it, then you may get 16 or 17 or 18 or 20 Republican senators. I don't think he will, but I think he might. I'm going to give it about a 10 to 15% chance. Remember, his wife resigned. He sleeps with Chow every night.
Well, we don't know that.
They have separate bedrooms.
We don't need that image in our heads.
Okay, I apologize. That is a tough image. Anyway, if he agrees, it's going to happen. If he doesn't agree, it'll happen a couple of months down the road. It's not going to happen right away because there's too many more important things that the Senate has to do in terms of legislation. Those 3 things that I talked about, and there's a 4th one too that has to do with a change in the social society that exists. But that's 4 things for the next podcast. But there's a shot. Okay. If it doesn't happen next week before the inauguration, then it'll be 150 days after they're working on legislation, and there'll be a trial, and I don't believe they'll get 16 Republicans to vote for it, but the guy will be emasculated. That's what I think.
So I want to phrase my answer partly in the form of a question, and then yield my time to the gentleman from Las Vegas and the gentleman from Maryland here. It sounded like, from what I read, that there was a lot of merit to delaying the impeachment trial by 90 days. And, then you would have the Democratic majority in the Senate. You wouldn't need McConnell's approval. Hopefully the COVID response will have been taken care of. Biden can say, look, I took care of these priorities first because these were priorities. And now let's get to the impeachment of Trump so that he never holds office again, never gets a pension or whatever, whatever an impeachment will deprive him of. So I'll ask Vin, do you agree with the merits of that?
No, so I'm going to get Machiavellian on 2 levels here then.
Okay.
Machiavellian on 2 levels here. So the first thing is, let's talk about a little technical procedure here to build on what Mark was talking about, is that the Senate, once the Senate receives the articles of impeachment, they have to begin the trial within a certain number of days. So what happens is that it's up to the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. It's her decision as to when to send the Senate the articles of impeachment. And once that happens, there's a set procedure that the Senate has to go through right now. The Senate is in recess right now, which means that, Senator McConnell doesn't have to start the proceedings right away. He can wait till after the inauguration. He's got ways of delaying it, but, once the Senate is in session, he would have to begin the trial.
Quick question, I'm sorry, after the inauguration, is it up to him still?
No, after
No.
the inauguration,
Okay.
it's up to Schumer. But the thing that's going to happen is if McConnell agrees with Schumer, it takes the majority and the minority leader to call the Senate back into session. If McConnell agrees to call it back into session, I believe Pelosi will deliver the articles and there'll be a trial next week.
Yep.
If McConnell does not agree, I don't believe Nancy Pelosi is going to do that because it's going to hurt the legislative agenda. That's so much more important. And she'll wait.
Is she going to know that ahead of time, though? That's my question, I guess.
I think so. You
Yeah,
don't think Schumer's going to tell her?
Well, no, will she know McConnell's intentions ahead of time?
Schumer will tell her that he and McConnell have made a deal.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you've got that aspect. So now let's get Machiavellian on both sides. The first side you get Machiavellian is on the Republican side. If I'm Senator McConnell and I really want to be devious, I start the impeachment trial right away. And the reason why, not only do I start the impeachment trial right away, but I get the 16 or so senators he needs on board from the Republican side. I line them up, I whip them and say, we're voting for impeachment. We will take the heat from the rest of the Republican Party to do this. And the reason we're doing this is what I talked about earlier is let's get President Trump out of the hair of the political party for good. Let's prevent him from running for a higher office again. That requires a second vote beyond the impeachment. But let's prevent him from running for a higher office again. Let's prevent him from freezing the presidential field moving forward. Let's damage him politically right now, get him out of the hair. It's for the good of the party. It's for the good of the country. That would be a really Machiavellian move for Senator McConnell to do. If I'm on the Democratic side, I agree that it will delay the legislative agenda, but it'll only delay it for 2 days. And I say, you want to know what? Let's do it now and let's take care of it now. And the reason why I say that is two reasons. One, I believe that Congress is capable of walking and chewing gum at the same time, where you can start working on the legislative session in the House while the Senate deals with this. And the second reason to do it is you actually want to harness the anger that's out there now. The further you get away from this moment of time, the more irrelevant the impeachment proceeding feels and the more easy it is for it to get politicized. And you really don't want it politicized after the fact. You want to capitalize on the anger and the animosity and the emotions of the moment to get the truest vote possible and force people, while this is fresh in everyone's memories and while people are still rattled by it, and why people are still walking through metal detectors to get into the actual Senate chamber and the House chamber while they're doing it to cast those votes. And I mean, to me, that would be the Machiavellian thing to do that way.
I agree that it would be. As you have, we both spent some time with Joe Biden before he was vice president.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And, I spent quite a bit of time with him in 2007 when he wanted to be president, when he wanted the nomination, and he was trying to get money from a group that I represented. I think that his whole pitch about unity and I'm going to be a president for everybody and let's not look back, let's look forward. I think that he's going to not want to have a quick impeachment proceedings and have the focus on that, but he's going to want the focus on the COVID vaccine and on let's start an infrastructure bill and let's provide relief to the people that can't, who have nothing to eat and no place to sleep and their children aren't in school. That's his pitch. And I don't think he'll get away from it. That's my opinion.
Yeah, it is his pitch. And I agree with you. I think the one part that's sort of hard to from a political standpoint, that's hard to measure, is the absolute anger right now of the activist base of the Democratic Party. And of the liberal wing of the Democratic Party, and actually, frankly, of Speaker Pelosi right now. And I get where she's coming from. I mean, her staff, what her staff went through when they barricaded themselves in the office, in their offices, and people banging, getting through the first door and almost getting through the second door to come after him. And thank God they didn't, right? It's the same thing with Mike Pence. You have people walking in the building trying to, saying, you know, they should hang Mike Pence. And they were a minute away from getting him. And so this is personal for her. And so I'm not sure how that plays out. So I agree that President-elect Biden's instincts would be to push this off. I'm not sure he'll be able to.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Let me interject something here. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about. I can see that I'll just go out on a limb here, and I'll talk to my co-host, Matt Lessinger, and we'll just decide to maybe do a part 2, because we didn't even scratch the surface on looking ahead. A couple of questions that I was going to ask, but I won't, but I'll tease the audience that we're going to cover the next time in our part 2 with our same guest. I think, Matt, you're nodding, I hope, with
absolutely
continue this maybe in a week or 2 when things settle down a little bit. Questions are, what should Biden do his first month in office? Should he reverse executive orders? Let's talk about that on our next show. Should a Biden Justice Department pursue legal investigations against Trump and his cronies and his family? Should that really, how's that going to be perceived if that were to go forward? That was going to be discussed here, but let's do that next time as well. And then maybe more important than anything, how soon will Trump as a political force become irrelevant, if he becomes irrelevant? Those are teaser questions for our next show here on An Intelligent Conversation. This has been a great lineup. I'm going to give you each I keep saying 30 seconds, 90 seconds, 2 minutes. Do I have 3 minutes? I'm going to each give you a closing remark. That's my closing remark. Before I leave, Matt, you're going to take it out at the end. Ben, you're going to go next, and then Mark, and then Matt. Did I get that right? But I want to thank my guests, Vin Narayanan and Mark Tenner, for coming on. Let's do a part 2, gentlemen, in a week to 10 days after we have the Biden administration. So, Vin, closing thoughts, anything we missed, tie up some loose ends. The floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, look, just like Mark started with history in the beginning of the show, I sort of want to close with history here. And we're in a really interesting moment of time. Mark brought it up consistently throughout the show, so he deserves a lot of credit for it. But we're in what Ken Burns is calling sort of a fourth crisis. And so if you take a look at what the other 3 crises are that he talked about, it was the Civil War, it was the Great Depression, it was World War II. And then this is the fourth crisis, with the basic theory being that it is really the nadirs of a society, the nadirs of civilization, that define how a society, how a culture, how a civilization, how a people come out of it. And so what we're looking at now is really going to define us as a country, as a society, as a people. How do we emerge from this pandemic? How do we emerge from this polarization of society? How do we emerge from the idea that, half the people think the other half of the country is the enemy? And to a certain degree, vice versa. How do we emerge from all of that? How do we emerge from what is, a fundamental shift of governance in the way we think about governance and the way we think about politics, which has happened over the last 20 to 30 years, and how do we emerge from that? And so what I'm really looking at over the course of the next year, the next 4 years, and even on a day-to-day basis, is I'm looking for the signs, whether they're little, whether they're big, that you want to know what we're gonna emerge out of this as President Reagan said, that city shining on the hill, and really standing up for the ideals and values that make America great. You know, there's a lot of myth making in American history, and it's important not to buy into the myth making. But there is one thing that I do believe about the United States of America. What makes America great is it was, for the most part, it was a country founded on a set of ideals and a set of ideas, and not founded on borders and, you know, rivers and mountains and a shared history and a culture and all of that sort of stuff. And it is the pursuit of those values and ideals that makes America great. And so right now we're at a crossroads, whether we keep pursuing those values. I believe we will. I most certainly hope we will. But this is what I'm looking for, is those signs, those events that point us in the right direction, where we keep striving to make what makes America great.
Mark Tenner?
Vin, you couldn't have said it better, and this will be the shortest speech that I've made this entire hour and a half. I was scared. I was fearful. I don't feel that way anymore. I want to be, and I am hopeful. The glass, please, God, be half full.
Well said. Thank you guys for joining in, and I'm really glad Nolan proposed the part 2. I think there's so much more we can talk about, and I'm really looking forward to it. I mean, certainly, you know, Vin, with what you said about, you know, how do we heal the country? I mean, from a more practical sense, you know, something that doesn't even fit the scope of this conversation, but we need to talk about regulating social media, you know, Twitter and Facebook. I mean, Twitter suspended Trump's account and Twitter stock plummeted. So these companies are not going to do this on their own, right? They're going to need regulation. So that's something maybe we can touch on.
Complicated discussion.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I'm not saying we'll have all the answers or anything, but you know, and you touched on race earlier, which certainly, you know, deserved a bigger place in this discussion. And so I sort of want to close with that, because one of the things you see on social media constantly is, and especially with the attack on the Capitol, was like, what if it were Black people doing this? Right? And you see how the forces were lined up during the Black Lives Matter march, and how it was the exact opposite here. I think for me, this is the last time that discussion should take place. What if it were a Black person doing it? What if it were a person of color doing this? That's jumped the shark for me. I'm not saying that the people saying that aren't right. They're 100% right. But if you don't get it by now, you never will. Like, this was it. This, you know, we know that the people, you know, chanting Blue Lives Matter didn't give a shit about cops, right? It was white people beating up cops. They didn't care about police as a whole. They just cared about the ones that were on their side, helping to keep Black people down. And since these white supremacists had enough allies within the Capitol Police Force, they were escorted out without any arrests. If you don't see the difference in treatment along racial lines now at this moment, I don't think you ever will. So there's no point in continuing to point out on social media, what if a person of color did this? This is it. End the discussion right now. You know, there can't be a better real world example than what's just taken place. And this is not just about looking at society's actions. This is about looking within oneself for each of us and realizing how each of our own actions vary tremendously based on the person with whom we're interacting, whether they're white or a person of color. If we can take that away from what happened at the Capitol, maybe we stand a chance of coming together and healing. That's all I've got to say.
All right. So Matt Lessinger, thank you for the closing words. Very passionate. Everybody here very passionate about what they believe in. Thank you, by the way, to those of you who are watching us. This again is our 11th show of an intelligent conversation. Matt Lessinger approached me about 3 months ago with his idea. His idea was to have an intelligent conversation amidst the shouting and all of the dogma that we see and a lot of misinformation. Let's get people together, sometimes who agree and sometimes who disagree, and let's just have that conversation. So this has certainly been one. Gentlemen, thank you for being our guests here. Let's do this again in another week and a half. And I'm Nolan Dalla on behalf of my co-host, Matt Lessinger. Thanks again to Mark Tenner and Vin Narayanan. We'll see you next time on An Intelligent Conversation. Good night.
Right.
Good night.
Good night, and thanks for having us.